IVM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I am Pranay and today I have with me Sarthak, and both of us are recording in our office studio after a gap of nearly 2.5 years. Sarthak,
Yes.
It's been a long time. So listeners, please check out the audio quality. Let us know if this works better than what you've been listening to over the last 2 years. Before we begin this conversation, just an announcement. The next cohort for our GCPP course, the application deadline is approaching soon. So please do apply. There are 3 specializations in technology policy, advanced public policy, and defense and foreign affairs. So if the conversations that we have on this podcast interest you, you will learn a lot more through the course. So do apply. So let's get to today's conversation, Sarthak. There has been a lot of reportage recently on the poverty estimates in India. In fact, 2 different papers have come out in recent times. Both papers estimate poverty numbers very differently in India, and there's a lot of debate and discussion around it. So I thought let's have a conversation about poverty numbers in India, what these papers mean, and how should we actually look at this data in the right perspective. All right, so let's begin there. But Sarthak, before we go into the deep dungeons of data mining and data analysis, can you give a TLDL, too long didn't listen, estimate of our conversation? If the people have to drop the conversation in the next 30 seconds, what should they take away from this conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Pranay. So that's an interesting way to think about it. So we haven't had any official poverty estimates for the last 10 years or so. Last estimates were in 2011-12. As a result of which, what happens? If you have to understand the poverty level, there are some estimates made by economists. And since economic statisticians, they also don't have the official numbers, they will make different estimates based on different proxies, etc. As a result of which, you now have different numbers, and again these numbers diverge because of multiple factors, right? So that's the issue at hand, and how do we resolve for this is something that we're going to talk about.
All right, so you're saying over the last 10 years we don't have any official government estimates which estimate poverty, right?
Yeah.
That's so striking, Sarthak. I mean, one of the main goals why we even have a state is finally for prosperity and well-being of Indians, all Indians, right? And I think eradication of poverty has been a main goal, at least the stated goal of so many governments. And yet, we don't have government numbers which actually tell us the status of poverty over the last 10 years. That's really important, because I see around that a lot of the debate is actually on inequality, etc. But the main thing, which is the fact that we shouldn't have extreme poverty in India, that itself, we are losing steam on it. In fact, the government data is not there over the last 10 years, and it's all okay. People are just going about their lives. So that's like really striking thing for me. I think it again re-emphasizes the fact that we need to be laser focused on looking at poverty numbers, what are government policies doing eventually to help people get out of this cycle of poverty, right? So, all right, so let's begin. Before you go to the estimates and how they diverge, etc., let's get to the basics. So, how is poverty estimated in India? As far as I understand, there is a monetary estimate of poverty and there is a non-monetary estimate. So, let's begin with the monetary estimate of poverty. How is it done?
So, Pranay, it's an interesting question, and to understand how it is estimated, we can go back to the 1960s also, right? So, at different points of time, governments have again appointed committees which have been tasked with the process of measuring poverty. So usually what is done here is first you identify what is the most essential thing which is required for your survival, maybe, right? And identify those commodities. It can be food, it can be education, it can be health. So identify those things, and then you find out how much of all these things is required and what will be the total cost of acquiring all these things, right? So you are basically creating a basket of all these commodities, and what is going to be the cost of that basket. That's what that is referred to as the poverty line. So if someone is able to spend an amount of money which is more, which is equal to the poverty line basket, or which is more than the poverty line basket, that person is above poverty line. And if you're not able to afford that, you are below poverty line. So this is the most basic way by which estimation of poverty is done. But here again, there are a lot of things which are subjective, right? For example, what all commodities will you include? What will be the weightage of these things? Are you adjusting for inflation? So all these things keep on changing. So if you look at the poverty estimates that were made in 1962, at that time, health, education, all these things were not part of this basket. Only thing that was included was balanced diet. Again, maybe at that time there was this assumption that the state will take care of your education and other things because, again, socialist norms and all things. But only balanced diet was there. Eventually, over a period of time, new parameters have been included. Footwear, I mean, apart from health education, things like footwear, clothing, these things have also been included in the last 15, 20 years. So this is how it is estimated. And we have had committees in 1962, that was the Working Group of Planning Commission. Then you had Alag Committee in 1979, Lakdawala Committee in the 90s, then Tendulkar Committee, and the last one, the thing that you mentioned, was the Rangarajan Committee 2011-12.
So, Sarthak, before you go into the details, let's understand this better. So, how is consumption measured?
Yeah, so this is again an interesting question. See, there are two ways primarily by which officially consumption is measured, right? One is by the CSO. They measure the national account statistics. So when you are trying to measure the GDP of any economy, right, you take into consideration government expenditure, household expenditure, right? So that part, from that you can get an idea about consumption. So here again, at a very larger level, you are trying to do that, right? What was the production that happened? What were the exports? Those factors you have taken into consideration. The second thing is what is carried out as part of national sample survey, right? So here you create some samples, you visit households, and from them you have a lot of questions, and from that questionnaire you ask those questions, and according to that you get an idea about consumption. So this is the two methods by which you can get an idea about consumption, official methods. But apart from that, since we don't have any recent data about from NSSO consumption data, so many people are now relying on some other consumption service. For example, CMI does that, right? So consumer household
CPHS,
consumer pyramid household survey, right?
Yeah.
So that is something which is being relied on. So from 2014, they have come up with this. Every year they do it thrice.
Okay, understood. So for consumption, there are two official ways. One is you can think of it as an inductive way, and one is a deductive way.
Yeah.
And right now, we don't have good estimates of those. So there are people who are trying to use other measures.
And one thing I wanted to point out, in 2017-18, whatever data came out of this NSSO survey,
Okay,
it
the
pointed
inductive way where you're going to
households and you're asking
Yeah.
them, okay, well, how much have you spent on this, that, etc. So according to that, the rural consumption has declined as per 2011-12.
Wow. Okay.
So in the span of 6-7 years, consumption of people in the rural areas had declined.
Right.
And again, that report was, it was scrapped, or it was not, the official report did not come out. So again, according to the leaked report, these are the data points.
Okay. Interesting. So this is one side where you're measuring consumption. You said what are the difficulties, what are the ways, and to estimate the poverty line, you're saying there are different committees which were formed, which will say that this much consumption, if you do, it is below the poverty line, and if it is above this particular number, it is right. So I'm assuming that 32 rupees per day per person estimate was a result of one of these committee results. Right? Okay. So that's really good, Sarthak. Now we have a good understanding of how is poverty estimated. So now we were talking about the monetary side, right? This you're only talking about footwear, food, etc. Right? But there are also now the modern notion of measuring poverty is that poverty is not just about monetary thing. There is also access to health, education, freedom. There are lots of those parameters, right? So there is this multi-dimensional poverty index which the Niti Aayog had recently brought a report on. So as far as I can understand, they did a baseline numbering exercise last year, I guess, and now after the NFHS results come, which is National Family Health Survey, we will get an estimate of what is the change in our multi-dimensional poverty number from the base exercise which was done earlier. So can you just explain what is this non-monetary poverty estimate? How does it differ from the others?
So this multidimensional poverty index, it's something which is not new. This has been going on for some time now. So this is usually referred to as the global multidimensional poverty index. And what they do here is they will look at three different areas, right? They say that poverty is multidimensional and there are multiple dimensions to poverty, right? Maybe you are lagging behind in health dimension, or maybe you are lagging behind in education, or maybe you're lagging behind in standard of living. All these things lead to poverty, and at the same time, these are all symptoms of poverty, right? If you can find out that someone is deprived along these lines, you can say they're poor people. So this has been computed for some time now. What happened last year was the Niti Aayog, again, they collaborated with UNDP and Oxford OPHI, and they came together and they came up with a poverty index, a multidimensional poverty index for India. So that was something which is different. Now, how do they measure? What do they do? See, they have three parameters here. I mean, I'm talking about the global MPI, health, education, and standard of living. And again, for each of the parameter, they will be having multiple indicators. For example, under health, they will have some parameters related to child mortality, maybe, right? When it comes to education, they will have some parameter related to years of education or something like that. In standard of living, again, they will have some 6 parameters. So they will go to these they will take National Family Health Survey data, and from that, or whatever data is there at the national level for different countries, and they will try to find out the deprivations. And if you're lagging behind along any of these indicators, your score from 1 will get deducted. So overall, you can get a score of 1, that particular household. And if you lag behind any of these indicators, your again score gets reduced, and as a result. And from that, you get an idea about where a particular household stands. So there are 3 broader indicators which are further divided into 10 indicators, the global MPI. But in case of India, what has happened is they have included 12 indicators, right? So under standard of living, they have increased 1 more indicator. There are 7 indicators. Under health, they have increased 1 more parameter related to maternal health. So 3 indicators over there. So 12 indicators are there. So if you look at multidimensional poverty index, it gives you an idea where do we lag behind, or where does India lag behind along these lines, right? Whether standard of living is the major reason why people are poor, or is lack of access is the major reason why people are poor. So those kind of ideas you get, right? So you can say it is more representative of poverty, but here also there are again multiple issues, which I think will come in a while.
Okay, Sarthak, before moving on to the next part of the conversation, we'll take a short break.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Think Fast, Varun and Sutirtha discuss Netflix's new buttons and do a rundown on the ongoing hiding and fighting trends in startups. On Big Talk About Tiny Humans, Devi Shobha and Meghna share strategies to help your child develop a healthy self-image. On Cyrus Says, Nivedita, Naveen, Antriksh and Cyrus discuss KGF Chapter 2 crossing 200 crore rupees over a single weekend. On Smarter with Sid, Siddharth talks about whether brands should use sustainability as an angle for marketing. And on Tere Mere Raste, Keshav takes us to the Sea of Humanity and Faith, the Kumbh Mela. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, please don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. And remember, you can always check us out on YouTube. We have a number of channels. You can go to ivmpodcast.com/YouTube to take a look at what those channels are. We're also doing a small listener survey to understand how you respond to our shows and the advertising on the network. We would really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it out. It really helps us build better shows for you and understand what you're looking for from advertising and what we can talk to advertisers about who you are. Please go to ivmpodcast.com/survey. It really would help us out. Thank you so much. And finally, would like to thank our sponsors for the network this week, SBI Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and Jupiter, a digital banking app. Thank you so much for making this possible.
All right, we are back in, and let's resume the conversation where we left it off. All right. So now, as far as I can understand, one, methodology wise, in the earlier monetary estimates, finally we are trying to estimate what is the cost of a basket of goods, and trying to then also estimate what are the consumption patterns of different families, and just compare whether actually their revealed consumption is higher than the basket of goods that we created, to come to a conclusion for on their poverty status. But in this measure, you said there are actually different indicators, infant mortality, maternal mortality, all others, and you're just actually measuring where we are families on each of those parameters broadly, and then I guess we give weightage to different these indicators, and we come to a conclusion. So broadly, it means that MPI is not strictly comparable with the other estimates that we were talking about, right?
Yes,
So
exactly.
we shouldn't confuse between measuring MPI estimate with the other estimates that we've been talking about. Like we know, we were talking about 1 in 5 Indian is poor. That was estimate of monetary poverty. Then this, we have non-monetary poverty. The only way you can compare this is when the next MPI result comes.
Compare it with the previous one.
Previous MPI. So that clarifies.
Provided they don't change the methodology.
Yeah, that's true. Provided they don't change the MPI methodology itself. All right. So this is great, Sarthak. Now I have some clarity on this issue. Now let's go to back to the monetary poverty estimates. Now, what is the current debate about? Why is this debate even there? Can you just lay it out for us?
Yeah. So recently what has happened is 2 papers have been published. One by some authors at World Bank and one by some economist authors at International Monetary Fund. Now, what are they broadly saying? The World Bank paper says that extreme poverty in India has fallen by 12.3% between 2011 and 2019. And at present, extreme poverty level is somewhere around 10%, right? So that's what they are saying. So again, 10% is a very small number. And as I was just mentioning some time back, 2017 consumption data that we had, right, rural consumption had decreased. That was being pointed out. And given the pandemic, right, given the situation that was there in the pandemic, we would expect more people to be losing out their jobs, or maybe their incomes would have gone down.
Yeah, or
right?
they would have had to go back to their villages because of the lockdown and all.
Yeah. So this particular estimate is saying just 10% of people are in extreme poverty. There was the other paper by authors at International Monetary Fund. They estimate that extreme poverty in India has been eliminated. So they are saying that 0.8% of Indians are in that extreme poverty category. Right? So almost nil. Right? So again, this is again a claim which is very difficult to, so as to say, digest or comprehend. Right? So that is the reason there is this debate going on right now.
So the divergence between them is around 10%, or 9.2% or whatever. One is saying that extreme poverty is around 10%, which is based on that NSS.
No, it's not based on NSS data. Since they don't have NSS data, the recent one, right? So what they have done is they have used the CMI's CPHS data.
Okay, so using CPHS data, you have one estimate. And what about the other estimate?
They have used the National Account Statistics data.
Okay, so the one which you said at the broad level, you are going to measure the consumption part in the GDP and then try to estimate what is the poverty line.
Exactly.
Okay.
But one thing, so again, there have been criticisms about both the estimates in the sense about the methodology of these estimates. For example, the first paper, which estimates that 10.2% of people in India are poor. Now, they are using CPHS data. They have tried to, again, ensure that the data is in its best form. But CPHS data has been criticized in the past because it tends to underestimate the number of poor people. For example, if you look at the CPHS data in 2019, it says that India has 100% urban literacy rate, and in rural areas, the literacy rate is 99%, right? Which might not be correct. And the 2015 literacy data was 83% for India. So within 2015-2019, from 83% to almost 100%, illiteracy is increasing, which is again questionable. And apart from that, other data points that you have, right? For example, ownership of fridge, TVs. If you compare it with the National Family Health Survey data, or if you compare it with NSS data, right, there is massive divergence. Apart from that, periodic labor survey data, if you compare labor earnings from periodic labor survey data and the CHPS data, there also there is massive variations, almost 50% variance, right? So these things have been pointed out that maybe we are underestimating the number of poor people, and possibly that is the reason why the number is 10%.
Right.
Right. So this is one of the major criticism. And when it comes to the other data, other estimate that we have from IMF, here also one criticism is there that if you look at the NAS data, the National Account Statistic data, and if you look at the National Sample Survey data, here also there is a massive variation. And it is not that for the first time we are having variation, and it's not that India is only having variation. Other countries also, they have this variation. But in case of India, the variation has been increasing over a period of time. So if you look at consumption expenditure by NSS, it is around 32% of the consumption expenditure by National Account Statistics.
That much difference.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is 2017 data. Right, in 1970.
But 2017 we don't know. So this is what you are saying is imputed from the reports.
Yeah, and before that also it was around 40%.
Oh, okay.
Right. So in 1970s, it was like 10% or so. But over a period of time, the NSS data as a percentage of NAS data is like some 30%, 40%.
Wow. Okay.
So that again makes the picture slightly, what do you call that, tricky or so.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. So this is the bone of contention then, right?
Yeah.
So there is wide variance between both the estimates. So Sarthak, let's get on to the next point where what is the way to get around this? As far as I can understand, the fact that our all this says that India's statistical architecture is weakened and has been weakening because of this wide divergence and the fact that we don't have a good estimate of NSS reports from the since the last 10 years, etc. So what are broadly the tentative ideas to make the situation better in your mind?
Yeah, first is we should have more frequent data collection and data should be out. I mean, at least you should know. See, if you look at 2017, right, maybe the data was something which shows that rural consumption has gone down, right? But even if the data is out, right, the scholars, researchers can look at it, they can find out the flaws. And if you are able to find out the flaws in the methodology, maybe, then only you can improve it, right? If you are not even talking about, if you do not have any data, there will only be speculation. So it's always better to have the data in front. And again, on that basis, maybe you can do some research and you can find that out. So I would say have these data more frequently in the open. Collect more data, have it in the open. And again, there should be, allow for different kinds of debates and discussions to that so that you can improve over a period of time. Another thing here is, for example, this MPI thing, right? We have included 12 indicators. The global estimate is on the basis of 10 indicators, you have included 12 indicators. Now, why are you doing this? There has to be some reason for this, right? All these things are not mentioned. The Niti Aayog committee does not mention why they have included 12 parameters instead of 10 parameters. And this will actually adversely impact your estimates because the two parameters they have included, one parameter is about institutional deliveries or antenatal checkups. In case of India, more than 80% of women do that, right? So what will happen is, most likely very few people will be deprived along these lines. And since everyone is getting the scores here, right, the other two parameters that are there, where India is possibly not doing well, their weightage is going down. So some people who would have been poor would not be included in the calculations. Similarly, another parameter they have included access to banking facilities, right? So that is another indicator. So here also, again, the numbers are it's good. 80% or so is the number here, right? So again, the weightage to the other parameters, it has gone down now.
Yeah.
Right. So poverty estimates will not be exact. And anyway, even if you're going ahead with that, always there should be some reason behind it, right? As we always talk about, for any policy, it should be backed by empirical evidence, right? So something like this is lacking. And it's not that we should only be relying on one kind of estimate, right? We should also be looking at multiple other estimates, right? They should all be pointing in the same direction. For example, let's say the data is showing that extreme poverty has been eliminated, right? Then it should also be backed by some other indicators, right? For example, global hunger index or something. There also India should be doing well over a period of time, right? So those things also we need to look for. We should not be only relying on one or two data sets.
Right. So, Sarthak, just a few thoughts on this. See, we know all numbers, all counting exercises are essentially political, right? So any counting exercise is an exercise in categorization. Whenever you're trying to categorize people, there are political interests involved, right? So I guess that answers all the things that you were asking, right? Why MPI is the way it is, right? There will be various interests, and that is not specific to India. It shouldn't surprise us. But I guess one thing we need is, irrespective of whatever political angle is to this, the fact that we need data on this, right? And we need data which comes out consistently. And like you said, it should be mentioned clearly the reasons why something is done, which is fine. There might be different reasons, but at least if you have data on the same parameters using the same methodology, which is coming out consistently year on year, then we can do the kind of comparison that you mentioned, right? Maybe you can see that, okay, on this estimate, you're saying everything's fine, but maybe you look at other estimates and then you can do a comparison and at least question. But the worst thing is the situation that we have today, where there is absolutely no data. Forget about what kind of weightages are used. That to me is a smaller problem. And in real politics, we should expect that there will be different weightages. There's no science to having the perfect weightage anyways. So those things will happen, but like you said, the first thing is to have this data consistently. And this is something that we always talk in our teaching courses, and the fact that the main reason why we need growth in India is finally to reduce poverty, right? Growth is the only mechanism available to reduce poverty on a large scale, right? And the fact that we have had a slowdown in growth, which we know, right? There is a slowdown in growth from 2011-12 onwards. So from that angle, we should be expecting poverty, the decline in poverty, to not be at the same rate as it was in between 2003 to 2008, right? Which was the golden growth period for India. Okay, Sarthak. So thanks for this very geeky understanding of the poverty number estimates. And I guess I'll reiterate towards the end that finally growth is the only mechanism through which large-scale poverty can be reduced. We've seen it in multiple countries, etc. There's no question about it. So the idea is that we need to keep focus on what are India's growth numbers, and through that growth, we will be able to achieve these reductions in poverty much faster. And we know over the last 10 years that our growth has slowed down, and that is something which is worrying, and it should worry all of us. So with that, we'll end this episode. Thanks a lot, Sarthak.
Thanks, Pranay.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Habits? Routines? How exactly do they help us get better? Well, to simplify it for you, tune in to the Habit Coach podcast. I am Ashton Doctor, and I'm going to be here to help you get better daily with some simple, easy-to-do habits that you can easily adapt to your life. So tune in to the Habit Coach podcast from Monday to Friday, because I believe that awesome lives start with awesome habits.
सफर, रास्ते, मंजिल और मुकाम, अक्सर ये हमसे कुछ कहना चाहते हैं, पर हम हैं कि अपनी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में इन्हें सुनने से कतराते हैं। नमस्ते दोस्तों, मेरा नाम है केशव चतुर्वेदी और मैं आपको ले चलूंगा कुछ ऐसे सफर पर जहां आपको एक नया नजरिया मिलेगा सफर और मंजिलों को देखने का। आइए इन किस्से कहानियों में डूब जाएं। हर मंगलवार और शुक्रवार